Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Livability Room. My name is Hannah, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's session. We also have Wendy online here as another moderator this morning. We have a great session lined up for you called When Disaster Strikes with emergency managers from Rowlett, Garland, and Plano, Ed, Misty, and Carrie. As this is the last session this morning, I know most of you have heard about our Zoom etiquette, but in case there's anyone new joining us for this session, I'm just going to retouch on a few of those items before I pass it over to our amazing speakers for their presentation. First, please ensure your cameras are off and your microphones are muted. This session is recorded, so it's important that your microphones stay muted. Second, please hold all questions until the question and answer portion at the end of the session. We'll have 10 minutes at the end for questions for our speakers. Please toss all questions into the chat throughout the presentation, and I'll pose as many to our speakers as we have time for. If we run out of time and your question's unanswered, please feel free to reach out to your speaker directly. I'm going to put their contact information into the chat. If you'd like to ask your question yourself, you're more than welcome to, but please use the raise hand feature during the question and answer for me to call on you. Then turn your video on and unmute your microphone and ask your question. Please limit all other chat activity to speaker-specific questions. The chat will also be saved as a transcript at the end of the session. Lastly, please do your best to not be disruptive to our speakers. If there's any inappropriate behavior, you will unfortunately be removed from the summit and you won't be able to re-enter. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Ed to begin introductions.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Good morning. My name is Ed Balderas. I am the Emergency Management Coordinator for the City of Rowlett. I've served as the Emergency Manager for Rowlett for a little over 8 years. In that time, I've supported several responses, from spending 2 days getting toys and food for Bentley the Ebola dog to traveling across southern Texas after Hurricane Harvey, and more recently helping to lead the city's COVID-19 and February winter storm responses. But I think my most important response was for the 2015 tornado that cut through the southeast portion of the city the day after Christmas. That's all I have.
Good morning. My name is Misty Gardner. I currently serve as the Director of Emergency Management for the City of Garland. I've worked in public safety for about the past 25 years. I started off in dispatch and serving as a paramedic, and then shifted my focus to emergency management about 17 years ago. Like Ed and Carrie will describe, we've all worked on multiple regional and state response teams. Through that, we've had a lot of disaster experience that we're able to bring back to our cities. In addition to the ones that are there on the list, we've served in multiple statewide responses. So thank you for allowing me to present today.
Thank you, Misty. Great.
Good morning. I'm Carrie Little. I'm the Director of Emergency Management. And like Ed and Misty, I have been doing this job in North Texas for a little while. Right now, I'm at about 24 years. I've worked in a variety of cities across North Texas. And like Misty and Ed, I too have responded to both local disasters and disasters across the state. Because I've been doing this a while, my very first event was the Wedgewood church shooting, and then the tornadoes through downtown Fort Worth in 2000. So thank you for having us, and we look forward to a good presentation.
Thank you, Carrie. So first, we're going to start with, why is neighborhood-based preparedness important? So Ed, would you like to start us off here?
Thank you. Well, the first reason is that often neighbors will be the first to respond, especially during those large disasters where city and mutual aid resources aren't able to immediately respond to every call for help. Second, your neighbors will often be facing the same challenge or similar challenges to your own. And last, and sort of as a realization of the first 2 points, your neighbors may be able to and willing to provide you with knowledge, skills, or other assets that may help you with your disaster response and recovery. For example, we have many tornado safe rooms across Rowlett that are shared between multiple households. Also, neighbors often help cut down trees after a severe wind event, and neighbors a lot of times will pass information along regarding recovery efforts on Nextdoor, Facebook, and other social media platforms. Anything, Misty, Carrie, do you like to add to that?
Great. So for the next portion of our presentation, panelists are going to share with us a bit of information about what emergency management looks like in each of the 3 cities. So Ed, if I can get this to advance, would you like to start us off with Rowlett?
Sure. To start, you'll notice a lot of similarities regarding how emergency management is structured across our cities. By state law, our current mayor, Tammy Dana Bastion, is in Rowlett, is the emergency manager director for Rowlett. While I'm hired by and report to the fire chief, the mayor then designates me to carry out her day-to-day emergency management responsibilities. In the last year, we've also been fortunate enough to be able to add Hannah Myers, our moderator, as the EM specialist to help support me in that role. We have a very active disaster volunteer program managed by the Rowlett Sensitive Corps Council. They run a community emergency response team, or CERT, a fire corps team, a volunteers and police services team, and a fire CERT explorers post. We also last year created the Rowlett Community Organizations Active and Disaster Committee appointed by City Council. And that group brings together the city, businesses, nonprofits, churches, and other groups and individuals to help better coordinate disaster response recovery efforts across the city. A few programs that we offer our residents include 2 CERT classes per year, both a fire and police citizen academies and the Connect Rowlett the Connect Rowlett Citizens Alert system for receiving emergency notifications, and a safe room rebate program that helps reimburse residents for part of the cost for installing a tornado safe room. Next slide. I have a few pictures over the next few slides. The first 3 are sort of the support that was provided by CERT after the 2015 tornado. This first picture shows some of the 300 CERT members from Rowlett and across the region that help respond to our city. Next slide. Here you'll see some of the CERT members helping conduct damage assessments the day after the tornadoes, and they help do that for 2 days, sort of help the city gauge the extent of the damage caused by that tornado. Next slide. And here they are supporting the distribution of supplies to impacted residents. Next slide. After the tornado, we had several groups formed by residents to help neighbors. One was the Looter Booters group that focused on looter prevention and reporting. Next slide. I laugh every time I see this picture. I won't say I'm in support of or against what Mr. Rhodes' idea was here, but a lot of neighbors took protecting their property and that of their neighbors very seriously after the tornado. So it just shows the importance and sort of the self-initiated efforts by residents and neighbors to help others and recover from that tornado. That's all I have.
Thank you, Ed. Misty, would you like to share with us about Garland?
Absolutely. So the Garland Office of Emergency Management has changed quite a bit over the years. At its most robust, the office had about 6 positions identified and a couple of interns, but several of the positions were funded through grant funding and projects that have dwindled away. So as of right now, with budget constraints and staff, forcing staff changes, as of today, we have 2 staff members, myself and the Planning and Preparedness Coordinator. And we have open positions for the Response and Recovery Coordinator, as well as the Administrative Assistant. So we're working to rebuild there. You can go ahead and change the slide, Hannah. So much like Rowlett, there are many groups and programs in Garland that we offer to the public and work to create and foster relationships with the public so that we can use them actively after disaster and share information openly. Local cities are never able to meet every need after disaster, especially without support and coordination of all local service and volunteer groups. So that's why we find it so important to keep them active. So a few highlights for Garland. The Garland Area Service Providers is a group. It's a large communication network of Garland service agencies, and we coordinate with them routinely in blue sky days, but then obviously they are a conduit for us for all those groups during a disaster, with the intent of getting whatever support the local citizen needs as quickly as possible by the right agency. Then the groups that we have to offer. The Garland Emergency Corps is a logistics and labor support group that provides equipment, training to citizens, and they are the oldest public safety group that we have in the city, all civilian volunteers. And then the Citizens Police Academy and Fire Academy, they both have alumni associations that are very active. I believe for both, there are several thousand members, but in the active police, for sure, I know there's over 1,000. So big groups offer a lot of connectivity with all the city departments, not just the police and fire departments. And then our Garland Races group, which is our radio amateur civil emergency service group. They're dedicated volunteers and they work directly with the Office of Emergency Management, but their original purpose was to support emergency communications. And then over the years, as communications networks have gotten more and more robust, we looked for other opportunities for them to serve. And now they serve as skyborne spotters for us in coordination with the National Weather Service. So they provide ground truth for us and help us match up what's really happening in the environment with what we see on radar so that we can hopefully get warnings out in a timely manner through the Weather Service. The Residential Lockbox program is a pretty unique program that, again, the police department takes the lead on, but it allows us to gain access to residents in an emergency without kicking in their doors. So if you are ill or passed out for some reason or trapped in your home, they can get into your house without causing any damage. So there's very specific guidelines for who can be part of that program, but if you're interested in that, you can find it on PD's website. Our Garland Overnight Warming Shelter, or GLOWS, that's a coalition, again, of agencies, churches, and organizations. One of the churches is actually in Rowlett, the most current one that's going to serve as our overnight warming shelter. And that is specifically meant to serve our unhoused or homeless population during inclement weather. So during nights when the wind chill is forecast to be below 32 with precipitation, or 28 or less with no precipitation, they open these warming shelters up. And it's 100% volunteer organization. And then currently the Office of Emergency Management is updating our hazard mitigation action plan. It's updated every 5 years, and this plan identifies local hazards and vulnerabilities, as well as specific projects that we plan to undertake so that we can help reduce the impacts or mitigate those hazards in our city. So this plan depends greatly on the input from the public and your feedback. So if there's any interest in doing a quick survey for us on that, you can click or scan the QR code that's on the screen, or you can go to our garlandtx.gov/OEM is the landing page, and it will allow you to take the survey in English, Spanish, or Vietnamese. Hannah, you can switch. So as far as communications networks that we utilize for the city, we in the City of Garland have one coordinated communication system, and everything's funneled through our Public and Media Relations Department. So we do have the social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and network, those avenues that are on the screen. And then you would just look for the City of Garland or Garland, Texas. We also utilize a city emergency notification system. We call it the Garland Alert System. And the system can send text, emails, and make phone calls to notify citizens in case of an emergency, as well as to share important information after disasters, such as messages like what we did after the winter storm in February, which advised citizens when we open shelters, updates on utility outages and things like that. So citizens could register for the system. It does include some landlines and some voice over IP lines that we can get openly, but other than that, when you do register, you can register to receive weather warnings as well if you would like. So again, with the QR code, if you scan that with your phone, it'll take you to a landing page where you can register for our system. So that's a little bit about Garland programs, and I'll hand it over to Carrie to talk about Plano.
Good morning. Thank you. So in Plano, we are fortunate to have a very robust office, and I've been in Plano for 7 years. In the past 7 years, we have added 2 additional positions to our office. So we now have 6 full-time and 2 part-time positions in our office doing emergency management. I'm the director. We've got 2 assistant directors and then specialists supporting our efforts. So we are very thankful to our city management and our city council for supporting that, because the job that we have to do is a very large and robust job. Next slide, please. So like Rowlett and Garland, Plano has a variety of opportunities for our residents to get plugged in, to help support emergency management efforts. Plano offers a CERT program, and we provide 2 CERT classes each year. We do one in the winter and then one in the fall. There's also very active citizens fire and citizen police academies, both with academy alumni agencies. Plano has a very large volunteer in Plano effort, where volunteers support all of our city departments in a variety of capacities, and we are able to press some of those volunteers into service during disaster. We also coordinate with a variety of community groups to provide assistance to the emergency management office, like there's a Plano Amateur Radio Club. And then like Misty talked about in Garland, Plano has an overnight warming station in partnership with the Salvation Army in Plano, and that's supported by these groups. Next slide, please. In Plano, we have emergency management channels that are specific to Plano emergency management. So we are on Facebook, we are on Twitter, and we post messages with different frequency on each of those channels. We have a YouTube channel with short videos in what we call Ready with Ron. Ron is a longtime part-time employee with us, but he provides short videos covering personal emergency preparedness topics. We did one around Halloween one year, and it was preparing for a zombie apocalypse, but it was also how you could take those zombie apocalypse type tools and transition them into regular emergency preparedness. There's short videos on preparedness for your pets, preparedness for your cars, tornado shelterings, just a variety of topics. And then we utilize Plano City Call. You could receive, when you register for that, you can receive text, email, or calls to a landline or cell phone to provide a variety of information, much like Misty talked about in Garland. We send out emergency information. You can elect to receive weather alerts. We send out traffic information. During the winter storm, we sent out a variety of different utility information and information about water pickups or warming stations. To register for that, you can text Plano to 99411. But that is our Plano City Call. We also, after we sound the sirens in Plano for severe weather events, we will send out a messaging as to why those sirens were sounded.
Thank you very much, everyone. I hope that these quick overviews give you a good, brief overview of what emergency management is like in each of our 3 cities. Misty, if you wouldn't mind taking this first question, how can disaster preparedness methods be incorporated into your neighborhood?
Sure. So first of all and foremost, I guess, is being personally prepared makes you able to not only respond for yourself and protect your family. You're really your best defense against a disaster. But if you're prepared, you're less likely to need assistance, and then you're better able to help your neighbors that may be impacted more than you are. So first of all 3 cities have a public education and outreach program. These are the 2 main programs, the Know What to Do program and the Ready program. Both programs provide easy steps to prepare yourselves and your families for disaster, such as building a personal emergency plan, how to build a kit for your home or your car, and then taking specific preparation steps depending on the hazards that you face. So there are obviously different steps for tornadoes or winter weather, for instance. So all of these programs, again, if you want to gain access to them through the web pages, they're readily available to you. but also emergency management staff from all three cities seek opportunities, and we're very willing to come out and do community meetings, provide presentations or resources, etc., for all the residents that are at those events. So again, take care of yourself first. Just like on an airplane, you put your oxygen mask on first and then your child or someone around you. So same thing, take care of yourself, and then you can help your neighbors during a disaster. So moving to the next bullet, your insurance coverage. Make sure, so on your insurance, there's going to be limitations usually for groups of belongings like antiques, jewelry, firearms. So look at those categories and make sure that your insurance covers at the limits that you would need them to cover to replace your belongings if you were impacted by disaster. And then also specific coverage or clauses, and especially limitations, apply to flooding specifically. So make sure what coverage you have. In general, most people do not have flood insurance, even though they think their normal coverage includes it. But usually it's a separate policy or addendum that needs to be taken out so that you can have flood insurance. So check your coverages, make sure that you are covered for what you think you're covered for so that you can repair your home if you have impacts. Neighbors helping neighbors. So just like the examples that Ed gave earlier and then Carrie talked about, just knowing your neighbors can help after a disaster. Believe it or not, just checking on them is a major contributor to how fast you're able to respond and recover after a disaster. And you never know when you may be the one that needs the help. So creating those networks, and that's what it talks about on developing relationships and communication networks. Just knowing who is supposed to be in your neighborhood, who's not supposed to be in your neighborhood, and then taking the time to reach out and do welfare checks on one another. It could be a simple thing they need. Maybe they just need a supply that you have and that you can offer, or maybe a group of folks need to get together and move a tree off of a driveway to allow people to go to work. But regardless, building those relationships is the very first step, and it can help us prioritize when we get into your neighborhood as well, if you have an idea of the scope and who needs help the most. So moving to the next bullet, learning about local warning systems. Carrie touched on this a little bit. So some of the systems that we have, like our outdoor warning sirens, but then also the notification systems, understanding how we use them, when we use them. In general, we try to be consistent, but each community needs to use it to meet the needs of that community. So there are some small differences. As far as outdoor warning sirens, in general, they're just meant to get you to go from outside to indoors and find out what's going on and how to protect yourself. So we have lots of myths around outdoor warning sirens that we don't really have time to talk about, but they're just not used for tornadoes. So know what the cities where you live, what they use it for, and when they use it, and then when they test it. Next, establishing a support system. So family and friends, neighbors, you can build communications plans with one another, again, so you can check on one another. You check in and on each other at regular intervals. That way you know if something's wrong. Plus, having the system in place can especially help if one of you are impacted and maybe the others aren't, and then you have the resources to help one another after a disaster. So finally, once you develop emergency plans like evacuation routes or for fire or shelter in place plans for things like tornadoes or severe weather, practice and make sure that everyone in your household is comfortable with those and understands the plan. This makes it so much faster when you actually need to put the plan into action, and reduces the anxiety and the fears because people feel more confident about what they need to do to protect themselves. So Ed, Carrie, anything to add on those?
I don't have anything.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Misty. For the next one, Carrie, let's jump to you. What should our communities do when a disaster strikes?
Well, just like Misty talked about creating your support network and your communication networks, one of the easiest things we can do is help share warning messages with our neighbors. Sometimes it takes hearing from somebody else to really understand the warning messages, and then creating a network to check in, to check in with our neighbors and make sure that they're okay after a disaster event has occurred. Oftentimes we find in disasters that it's easier to text messages because those networks, the text networks aren't as bogged down as the phone networks are. I know personally, I was able to teach both my grandparents and my parents how to use their cell phone to text messages because it was important in disasters. Oddly enough, my 92-year-old grandfather is much better at text messaging than my mother. So, but we used that and we practiced that prior to disaster striking. We want to report the damages after a disaster has occurred. We want to take pictures before we start the cleanup so we can tell the story of how bad was in our area. That's important for insurance. It also becomes important for us as locals understanding the full extent of the damage. We don't always get to see inside the house and see how things were affected. So taking pictures is helpful. We also need to know the extent of the damages as the local jurisdiction so that we can help press in resources to best address the disaster. The state of Texas has started a new program where they are asking for damage assessments to be self-reported. They have a website, damage.tdem.texas.gov, where individuals can go and report to help capture the individual, the household damage. And that helps the state to know the full impact of the disaster. It also helps us in meeting our FEMA thresholds because we have to meet certain thresholds to be able to qualify as a state for FEMA assistance. And this year, those thresholds went up significantly. So the state's trying to use these digital tools to help them collect that data. As neighbors, we want to look out for our neighbors and we want to support them by reporting suspicious activities. And that includes like what Ed had talked about, where they had the group come together for the looter booters, but it also includes reporting scammers or people sometimes that will come post-disaster and they're fly-by-night companies. And we want to make sure that we're protecting ourselves and we're protecting our neighbors and helping them understand the best way to recover from disaster, but reporting any of those suspicious activities. We ask that if any neighborhood-wide recovery efforts are going on, that the neighborhood notify the city. For example, debris cleanup. If somebody is going in and completely clearing out a house of all of the debris, especially all of the wet debris, we need to know that because that's going to require additional resources for solid waste pickup. And we want to help make sure that we can get those resources to those areas and that it's not just sitting, all of that damp debris isn't just sitting out there waiting to be picked up. And then we want our neighbors to participate in our community-wide recovery programs. We want them to get plugged into some of our VOADs or COADs. Those are our organizations, our volunteer organizations or community organizations that are active in disaster. And they can get plugged into that either as recipients of assistance, or if they weren't affected, they can provide assistance to their neighbors. So there are opportunities to plug in and understand how those different community organizations work, either to receive assistance because they were affected or to help their neighbors recover. So Ed or Misty, is there anything that you want to add?
Great, thank you very much, Carrie. Ed, do you want to share any ideas you have for starting neighborhood-based disaster preparedness programs?
Sure. I think this first point we've discussed quite a bit. Go get trained, and if possible, go get trained with your neighbors. Not only it helps develop that relationship, but then also an understanding of what each is capable of and what someone may want to do while the other performs another task. We have the Citizens Fire Academies, police academies. You can also go get certified in basic first aid, CPR, AED training through the Red Cross or other mechanisms. Another great idea is to have a party. Neighborhood parties are great. At least here in Rowlett, we have a block trailer that you can reserve that has chairs, tables, lawn games, pretty much everything you need to sort of set a basic party in your neighborhood. Also leverage your HOA. That's probably the best mechanism for ensuring that you reach as many of your neighbors as possible, especially an entire subdivision. And then also teach the importance of individual and household preparedness and planning to your neighbors and your household. So whether that's providing information or teaching them specific skill sets or how to use equipment like chainsaws, how to turn off water when we have another freeze event like we did this past winter. Just, share what you know with your neighbors to better prepare the entire neighborhood.
Thank you. So lastly, let's just discuss the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the February winter storms that we had this year. Ed, how do you think these events impacted neighborhood emergency preparedness?
Well, I think having those pre-disaster networks were really important for us. We had that community organizations active in disaster, and that helped bring some neighborhood groups and also some more established organizations to identify issues within the community and how we could resolve it and sort of pool our resources to better coordinate those efforts.
Misty or Carrie, do you have anything else you'd like to add here?
You are muted, Misty.
I knew that was going to happen. I think we've touched on most of it. I'd rather give them an opportunity to ask questions.
Awesome, great. Let me stop sharing here for a second. So thank you so much for this informative presentation. We do have a few minutes for a Q&A, so if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or use the raise hand feature and wait to be called on. If you'd like to pose a question to one speaker specifically, please include their name with your question or the city that you're asking about. Otherwise, we can pose any questions to all of our panelists. Not seeing any questions in the chat yet. I can get us started though. What are the most common or biggest hazards that you feel like our communities face? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I think our most common hazards in North Texas are severe weather hazards, at least in terms of frequency.
You are muted, Hannah.
Oh, sorry. I see one hand raised. Kathy, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. So taking a look back at the winter storm specifically, but also even COVID, is there any commonality that you saw maybe where communities like neighborhoods and stuff weren't prepared that you're saying, that you could say this would be a great service of how we could spread information to our, residents to be in a better prepared situation?
I think for us in Garland, we saw some very common threads related to misunderstandings with utilities and sort of the assumption that those are always going to be available. And in this situation, it really wasn't up to the local jurisdiction on being able to keep those going. From the water standpoint, the pipes were frozen, and when they thawed, it caused flooding in homes, and we knew that was going to happen. But I think the common, I don't want to say, I guess, apathy about people get used to utilities being provided and they expect them to be provided, and having a plan for if they're not available, because I think it caught a lot of people by surprise, even though warning messages were going out a good week in advance that this could be a problem. And I think there was a lot of misunderstanding about the power grid and how that works. And I don't want to get into a political discussion about the limitations that occurred with it, but just again, reiterating the message that there are things that people can do if they're ready ahead of time to prepare themselves and make sure that they've got extra charging capability, that they have other ways to heat their homes, that they have a network with their neighbors where they can check on one another, help each other turn the water off, and those types of things. So I think for us, it was just across the board, just a surprise by people that yes, the utilities that they're used to having may not be accessible after a disaster.
Thank you, Misty. I see a couple other hands raised. Julius, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, thank you all so much today for your time and the presentation information that you provided. Would you all be willing to come out and speak or do presentations to HOAs that might have an interest in an emergency preparedness program or something of the sort? I know, Misty, I'm in Garland, so I'm kind of hoping that you've got that time and capacity. Thank you.
Yes,
all of us.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
All of us talked about this prior to the meeting, but each of our offices are happy to go out and talk to community organizations, be that HOAs or businesses or civic organizations or clubs. The more opportunities we have to spread preparedness messages, the better off our community is as a whole.
And if you'd like to reach out to them to schedule some sort of presentation, everyone's contact information is in the chat. I can repost that if you don't see it. I also see Jade has her hand up. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes, thank you. So have you had an issue or kind of a case study where you've gone into the mobilization phase? So you've got a plan together and then you have to activate your different groups you've kind of designated to take a role in helping respond to an emergency where there's been something that didn't go according to plan, and how did you kind of recover from that?
I can give an example from the winter storm. We have the COAD and we have those communication networks very well established, but we were trying to identify shelter locations, and part of our planning, including opening up churches. Well, because there was no power, people couldn't get in. A lot of those networks really didn't work. So while we had that communication structure in place, we sort of had to adjust our planning. While individuals responded to our requests for information regarding whether or not they're going to be open, none of them could open. So we did find a way around that, and it was actually a business that we partner with who's a member of the COAD who we eventually used as a warming site for Rowlett instead of the churches, which was sort of the original plan outside of a city facility.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the group? You can either put them in the chat or raise your hand and we can pose them to our panelists. Seeing none, thank you again, Ed, Misty, and Carrie, for sharing all this incredible information with us. It is very helpful and very necessary. Now it's time for some final remarks and a survey back in the main room. So on the bottom right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a blue button that says Leave Room. That will take you back to the main room where you'll be able to fill out the survey. I think there are prizes involved, and it will take you directly back to the main room. So thank you again for joining and have a great rest of your day.